What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved actors walks onto a talk show stage expecting a warm conversation, only to find himself in the fight of his life? Michael J. Fox, the man who made us believe in time travel, who showed us what it means to face adversity with grace, found himself in a battle he never saw coming. The View, a platform known for its heated debates and no-holds-barred discussions, became the setting for one of the most explosive celebrity interviews in recent memory. This wasn't about promoting a project or sharing feel-good stories. This was raw, unfiltered, and completely unexpected. Before we get into what went down, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and drop a comment below telling us what you think about celebrity interviews that go off the rails. Now, let's dive into what really happened. The studio lights were bright as Michael J. Fox made his way to the table. The audience erupted in applause, a standing ovation that seemed to go on forever. This was a man who had earned every bit of that respect. His career, his courage, his refusal to let his condition define him, all of it had made him an icon. The hosts greeted him with smiles, the kind of warmth that suggested this would be another typical feel-good interview. But within minutes, the temperature in that room would change dramatically. The conversation started innocently enough. They talked about his foundation, the incredible work being done in Parkinson's research, the progress that had been made over the years. Michael spoke with his characteristic humor and humility, deflecting praise and redirecting attention to the scientists and researchers doing the real work. The audience was eating it up, hanging on every word. This was the Michael J. Fox everyone knew and loved, the one who could find light in the darkest situations. Then one of the hosts shifted gears. The question came out of nowhere, a sharp turn that caught everyone off guard. She wanted to talk about something Michael had said years ago, a comment that had been taken out of context and twisted by the media. It was old news, something that had been addressed and put to rest long ago. But here it was again, being dragged back into the spotlight. Michael's expression changed. The smile that had been so genuine moments before tightened. You could see it in his eyes, that flicker of frustration, the recognition that this wasn't going to be the conversation he thought he was walking into. He took a breath, composed himself, and began to explain. His voice was measured, patient, as he walked through the context that had been conveniently left out of the sound bites that had circulated years ago. But the host wasn't satisfied. She pushed back, her tone shifting from conversational to confrontational. She brought up other comments, other moments, building a narrative that seemed designed to corner him. The other hosts exchanged glances, some uncomfortable, others leaning in with interest. The audience, which had been so warm and welcoming minutes before, fell into an uneasy silence. Michael tried to redirect. He attempted to bring the conversation back to the foundation, to the work that actually mattered. But every time he tried to pivot, the questions came faster, sharper. It was like watching someone try to navigate a minefield, each step potentially explosive. And Michael, ever the professional, kept his composure, kept trying to engage in good faith. That's when things really started to escalate. Another host jumped in, and her approach was different. She wasn't asking questions anymore, she was making statements. Assertions about what Michael believed, what he represented, what his words meant. She was telling him what he thought, what his intentions were, as if she knew better than he did. And that's when you could see something shift in Michael. The patience was wearing thin. He leaned forward slightly, his hand steady on the table, despite the tremor that was always present. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. He said he appreciated the platform, he appreciated the opportunity to talk about the issues that mattered to him. But he wasn't going to sit there and be told what he believed. He knew his own mind, he knew his own heart, and he wasn't going to let anyone rewrite his story for him. The host bristled at that. She shot back, her voice rising, saying that public figures had a responsibility, that words had consequences, that he couldn't just say things and then claim they were taken out of context when people reacted. The tension in the room was palpable now. This had gone from an interview to a confrontation, and everyone could feel it. Michael didn't back down. He acknowledged that public figures had responsibilities. Absolutely. But that responsibility went both ways. The media had a responsibility too, to report accurately, to provide context, to not deliberately twist someone's words for ratings or clicks. He spoke about the number of times he'd seen his own words chopped up, rearranged, stripped of nuance until they said something he never intended. And he wasn't alone in that experience. It happened to people every single day. Another host tried to play mediator, tried to de-escalate, but the damage was done. The conversation had taken on a life of its own. What was supposed to be a celebration of Michael's work, his contributions, his courage, had turned into something else entirely. And Michael, who had spent decades handling the media with grace and humor, who had navigated some of the most difficult personal challenges imaginable with dignity, wasn't about to be steamrolled on national television. The host who had started this whole thing wasn't letting it go. She circled back, bringing up a specific interview from years ago where Michael had discussed stem cell research. She framed it as if he had been pushing a political agenda, as if his advocacy was somehow disingenuous or self-serving. and that's when you could see Michael's jaw tighten. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about the thousands of people who were counting on that research, the families desperately hoping for a breakthrough, the scientists dedicating their lives to finding answers. Michael's response was measured but forceful. He explained, slowly and clearly, that advocating for medical research wasn't a political stance. It was a human one. When you're living with a degenerative disease, when you're watching your body betray you piece by piece, you don't have the luxury of treating it like an abstract political debate. It's your life. It's your future. And if speaking up about the need for research, for funding, for hope, made him political, then so be it. But he wasn't going to apologize for fighting for himself and millions of others. The host fired back, saying that he had used his platform, his celebrity, to influence policy. She said it with an accusatory tone, as if using your voice for something you believed in was somehow wrong. Michael didn't miss a beat. He asked her point blank, "Isn't that exactly what this show does every single day? Don't all of you use your platform to discuss policy, to advocate for causes you believe in, to try to influence public opinion?" The only difference is that his cause was finding a cure for a disease that was slowly taking everything from him. That landed hard. You could see it in the faces around the table. Some of the hosts looked uncomfortable, others defensive. The audience, which had been silent, started to murmur. People were processing what they were hearing, and the dynamics of the conversation were becoming clearer. This wasn't a balanced discussion. This was an ambush, and Michael was refusing to play along. Another host tried to reframe things. She suggested that perhaps people were concerned because Michael's advocacy came from such a personal place, that maybe it clouded his judgment, made him less objective. It was phrased delicately, but the implication was clear. She was suggesting that his condition made him biased, that his desperation for a cure made him unreliable. Michael went very still. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but every word carried weight. He said that yes, his advocacy came from a personal place. How could it not? But that didn't make it less valid. In fact, it made it more so. The people in labs and boardrooms making decisions about research funding, they could afford to be detached and objective because it wasn't their bodies failing them. It wasn't their hands shaking uncontrollably. It wasn't their ability to walk, to speak, to live independently, slowly slipping away. So yes, he brought passion to this fight, because he had skin in the game in a way that most people making these decisions never would. He continued, saying that the idea that personal investment somehow disqualifies you from having a valid opinion is absurd. By that logic, parents shouldn't advocate for better schools because they're too personally invested in their children's education. Cancer survivors shouldn't speak about the need for cancer research because they're too close to it. Veterans shouldn't talk about veterans' affairs because they're biased. It was a ridiculous standard that only seemed to apply when someone was saying something that made others uncomfortable. The original host wasn't done. She brought up funding, suggesting that Michael's foundation had financial interests that maybe weren't entirely transparent. She didn't say it directly, but the insinuation was there, hanging in the air like smoke. The implication that there was something shady going on, that maybe the foundation wasn't as pure and altruistic as it appeared. That's when Michael erupted, not with yelling, not with theatrics, but with a controlled fury that was somehow more powerful than any outburst could have been. He said that every single dollar that went through his foundation was accounted for and transparent. The financial records were public. The research grants were public. Everything was out in the open for anyone who cared to actually look, instead of making baseless insinuations on national television. He looked directly at the host and said that if she had concerns about the foundation's finances, she should have brought them up before the show, given him a chance to provide documentation, to address them properly. But she didn't do that, did she? Because this wasn't about facts or transparency. This was about creating a moment, manufacturing controversy, getting a reaction. And congratulations, she got one. The tension was off the charts now. The other hosts were trying to jump in, trying to move things along, but Michael wasn't finished. He said that he had spent over 2 decades building that foundation from the ground up. He had poured his heart, his time, his own money into it. He had watched it grow into something that was actually making a difference. Funding research that was bringing us closer to treatments, to answers, to hope. And to sit there and have someone casually suggest that there was something corrupt about it, without a shred of evidence, was beyond insulting. Another host, trying to play peacemaker, suggested that maybe everyone was getting a bit heated and they should take a breath. She tried to inject some levity, to bring things back to a more comfortable place. But Michael shook his head. He said that no, they weren't going to just move past this like it didn't happen. Words matter. Accusations matter. You don't get to throw that kind of thing out there and then just change the subject when it gets uncomfortable. The host who had made the insinuation about the foundation's finances looked caught off guard. She stammered something about just asking questions, about it being their job to be thorough. Michael cut her off. He said that asking questions is fine. Journalism requires asking tough questions. But there's a difference between asking questions and making accusations disguised as questions. There's a difference between being thorough and being reckless. He pointed out that she could have said, "I'd love to learn more about how your foundation operates," or, "Can you walk us through how the funding works?" But that's not what she did. She framed it as if there was already something wrong, as if the lack of transparency was a given. And now he had to defend himself against charges that were never actually made explicit but were absolutely implied. The atmosphere in the studio had completely transformed. What started as a celebratory interview had become something nobody expected. The audience was riveted, some people nodding along with Michael's points, others looking uncertain about where this was all heading. The camera operators kept switching angles, capturing every expression, every moment of this unscripted confrontation. Michael continued, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it. He said that this was exactly the problem with modern media. Everyone wanted the gotcha moment, the viral clip, the controversy that would get shared a million times. But nobody wanted to do the actual work of understanding complex issues, of presenting nuanced perspectives, of having genuine conversations that might not fit neatly into a 3-minute segment designed to provoke outrage. One of the other hosts, who had been relatively quiet up until now, spoke up. She said that Michael was being unfair, that they had invited him on the show to celebrate his work, to give him a platform. They weren't the enemy here. Michael turned to her, and his expression softened slightly, but his resolve didn't waver. He said he appreciated the invitation. He really did. But somewhere along the way, this stopped being about celebrating anything and started being about putting him on trial for things he said years ago, for advocating for causes he believed in, for having the audacity to use his voice. He continued, saying that if they wanted to have a real conversation about the complexities of medical research, about the ethical considerations, about the challenges of funding and policy, he was all for it. Those were important discussions that needed to happen, but that's not what this was. This was a setup, and everyone watching could see it. The host who had started everything finally found her voice again. She insisted that she wasn't setting him up, that these were legitimate concerns that people had. Michael asked her directly, what people? Who specifically had these concerns about his foundation's finances? She couldn't answer. She talked vaguely about questions that had been raised, about things people wondered about, but she couldn't point to a single specific source or allegation, because there wasn't one. It was all innuendo and implication. Michael pressed the point. He said that this is how reputations get destroyed. Someone on a platform like this throws out a vague accusation, doesn't back it up with anything concrete, and suddenly that's the story. It doesn't matter that the foundation's records are spotless. It doesn't matter that they've been audited and praised by independent watchdog organizations. All that matters is that the seed of doubt has been planted, and it's almost impossible to completely uproot once it's out there. Another host tried to shift the conversation to something else, asking about Michael's recent projects, clearly desperate to get things back on track. But Michael wasn't ready to move on. He said that he wanted to address one more thing, because it was important. He looked around the table at each of the hosts and said that he understood they had a job to do. He understood that talk shows needed to be engaging, that they needed moments that kept people watching. But there had to be a line. There had to be some basic level of respect and honesty. He said that he had been doing interviews for over 40 years. He had sat across from countless hosts, answered thousands of questions, some easy and some incredibly difficult. He had never once walked out of an interview, never refused to answer a question, never lost his temper, until now. And he wanted them to understand that this wasn't about him being unable to handle tough questions. He had answered tough questions about his health, his family, his career, his struggles, all of it. This was about something different. This was about being treated like he was being dishonest or corrupt without any basis for it. The host who had made the financial insinuation finally spoke up again, and this time there was a defensive edge to her voice. She said that public figures had to expect scrutiny, that it came with the territory. Michael agreed completely. Scrutiny was fine. Scrutiny was necessary, but scrutiny required actually looking at the facts, doing the research, coming prepared with specific information. What she did wasn't scrutiny. It was a smear dressed up as a question. The tension showed no signs of breaking. If anything, it was building. One of the other hosts, clearly trying to salvage something from this disaster, suggested that maybe this was actually a good thing. Maybe having these difficult, uncomfortable conversations was exactly what needed to happen. Maybe the friction was productive. Michael gave her a long look and said that difficult conversations were indeed valuable, but only when they were in good faith. Only when everyone involved was actually trying to understand each other, to find truth, to move forward. This didn't feel like good faith to him. He elaborated, saying that a good faith conversation about stem cell research might involve discussing the ethical frameworks, the regulatory challenges, the scientific obstacles. It might involve bringing in multiple perspectives, presenting different viewpoints, allowing for complexity. What happened here was someone decided ahead of time what narrative they wanted and then tried to force him into it. That's not a conversation. That's an interrogation. The original host bristled at that characterization. She said she resented the implication that she had some kind of agenda, that she was trying to trap him. Michael responded calmly but firmly. He said that intentions didn't really matter at this point. Impact mattered. And the impact of what happened here was that someone with a huge platform made serious allegations about his integrity and his foundation without any evidence to back it up. Whether she intended to do damage or not, the damage was done. Another host jumped in, her voice strained, saying that maybe they should all take a step back. Maybe emotions were running high and everyone needed to cool down. Michael shook his head. He said that dismissing this as just emotions running high was exactly the problem. This wasn't about emotions. This was about standards. This was about accountability. This was about whether it was okay to use your platform to make serious accusations without having done your homework. He said that if any journalist did proper research into his foundation, they would find that it was one of the most transparent, well-run organizations of its kind. They would find documentation of every grant given, every dollar spent, every partnership formed. They would find independent audits confirming that the vast majority of funds went directly to research, not administrative costs. They would find testimonials from scientists whose work had been funded, from patients whose lives had been changed by the treatments that research had led to. All of that information was readily available to anyone who wanted to look. But looking takes time and effort, and apparently it was easier to just throw out implications and see what stuck. The mood in the studio was now completely somber. The audience, which had started out so enthusiastic, sat in heavy silence. The hosts looked exhausted, caught between wanting to defend themselves and knowing that Michael had valid points. The whole thing had spiraled so far beyond what anyone had anticipated. Michael took a breath and leaned back slightly. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter but no less powerful. He said that he wanted to be clear about something. He didn't come on the show looking for a fight. He didn't walk in with an agenda or a chip on his shoulder. He came to talk about work that mattered to him, work that could change lives, work that gave people hope. And somehow, within minutes, it turned into this. He asked them to think about why that happened, what that said about the current state of media and discourse. One of the hosts, her voice small, said that maybe they could have handled things differently. Maybe the questions could have been framed better. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was an acknowledgement, and you could see Michael register it. He nodded slowly and said that he appreciated that. He said that all he ever wanted was honest conversation. Ask him hard questions. Absolutely. Challenge his positions. Definitely. But do it fairly. Do it with actual information and a genuine desire to understand, not to score points or create drama. The host who had started everything remained silent now. Her expression was difficult to read, somewhere between defensive and chastened. Michael looked at her directly and said that he hoped she understood why he reacted the way he did. He said that when you've built something from nothing, when you've poured everything into a cause that could help millions of people, having someone casually suggest there's something dirty about it cuts deep. It's not just an attack on him personally. It's an attack on everyone who has worked on the foundation, everyone who has donated, everyone who has believed in the mission. He continued, saying that the foundation wasn't just his project. It was a collective effort of scientists, researchers, donors, volunteers, patients, families, all working toward a common goal. When someone questions the integrity of the foundation without basis, they're questioning all of those people. They're potentially discouraging future donors, creating doubt where none should exist, and ultimately hurting the very research that could lead to breakthroughs. The stakes were real, and the consequences of careless words were real. Another host, trying to find some middle ground, said that she thought everyone could agree that the foundation did important work. She said that Michael's advocacy had made a real difference in raising awareness and funding for Parkinson's research. Michael acknowledged that, but said it wasn't enough to just say nice things. Now, the damage from earlier in the conversation didn't get erased by compliments afterward. That's not how it worked in the real world. The clip of the accusation would circulate, the implication would linger, and all the nice words in the world wouldn't completely undo that. He said that this was the challenge with live television and with media in general. You can't take back what's been said. You can't unsay things. You can apologize, you can clarify, you can try to correct the record, but the initial statement is out there forever. And in an age where everything gets clipped and shared and taken out of context, that initial moment is often all that matters. People will see the accusation. Far fewer will see the clarification or the apology. That's just the reality. The host, who had been trying to mediate throughout, asked Michael what he would want people to take away from this conversation. It was clear she was trying to find some way to end on a constructive note, to salvage something meaningful from the wreckage. Michael thought for a moment and then said that he would want people to think critically about what they consume. Don't just accept what you hear at face value, whether it's from a talk show, a news program, or social media. Look deeper. Ask questions. Verify information. Hold people accountable for what they say, especially when they have large platforms. He said that he would also want people to understand that advocacy wasn't a dirty word. Speaking up for causes you believe in. using whatever platform you have to try to make a difference. That's not corrupt or self-serving. That's being engaged, being active, being human. We should encourage more of that, not less. We should celebrate people who use their voices for good, not tear them down or question their motives without cause. Michael then addressed the audience directly, looking past the hosts to the people watching. He said that if anyone had questions about the foundation, about where the money went, about what the research was accomplishing, all of that information was available. The website laid everything out clearly. Independent organizations had verified the foundation's work and given it top ratings for transparency and effectiveness. He encouraged everyone to look for themselves, to not take his word for it or anyone else's word for it, but to actually examine the evidence and draw their own conclusions. One of the hosts said that she appreciated Michael coming on despite how difficult the conversation had become. She said that it was clear he was passionate about his work and deeply committed to the cause. Michael responded that passion and commitment were important, but so were facts and fairness. He said he would always be passionate, would always fight for what he believed in, but he expected the same standards from media that he held himself to: accuracy, honesty, and basic respect. The conversation was clearly winding down now. The energy that had been so explosive earlier had transformed into something else. A kind of exhausted understanding that this had been important even if it had been painful. Michael said that he hoped this could be a learning moment for everyone, himself included. He said that maybe the silver lining was that it showed how much these issues mattered, how much was at stake, and how important it was to get things right. The host who had made the initial accusations finally spoke up one last time. Her voice was measured, careful. She said that she heard what Michael was saying and that she would reflect on how she approached these conversations in the future. It wasn't a full apology, but it was something. Michael nodded, accepting it for what it was. He said that was all he could ask for, that people think about the impact of their words and try to do better. As the segment came to a close, there was a sense that something significant had happened. This wasn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This was a moment where someone pushed back against the kind of casual character assassination that had become all too common in media. Michael had stood his ground, defended his work, and called out behavior that needed to be called out. Whether it would change anything in the long run remained to be seen, but in that moment, he had made his point crystal clear. The audience applauded as the show went to commercial, but it was a different kind of applause than at the beginning. It was respectful, thoughtful, maybe even a little uncomfortable. People had witnessed something raw and real, something that forced them to think about the media they consumed and the standards they accepted. Michael sat there for a moment, composed despite everything, a reminder that grace under pressure wasn't just about staying calm. It was about standing firm in your truth even when everything around you was trying to shake you loose from it. So what do you think about what went down? Was Michael right to push back as hard as he did, or should he have just let it go? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any of our future coverage of moments like these. These are the conversations that matter, the ones that make us think about how we communicate, how we treat each other, and what we expect from the people who have platforms to reach millions. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.